Yo, what's up guys, Alpha, and today I'm going to be starting a new series on the channel. So this is the Deck Doctor series where people can submit their decks to me and I'll have a look at them, I'll play with them, see what I think of them overall, try and find what I think is a nice refined version of the deck, and also just talk about different directions that you could build the deck in as well, depending on what your goals are or how the metagame shifts. And now currently this is something that we're trialing over on the MTG Zone Premium Discord, so if you're a premium member, feel free to go over there and submit your decks. Now I can't commit to getting to everyone's during this trial period, but if this is something that a lot of people are interested in, then it's definitely something that we could offer as maybe like a shop item on MTG Zone. So let me know in the comments if this is something that you'd be interested in doing yourself, and also just let me know if you like this sort of video, and I'll definitely try and do more in future if you do. So anyway, starting things off here, this is a deck that was submitted by Korga, and it is an Alchemy Arcane Bombardment deck. And this deck really caught my eye for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think Arcane Bombardment is such a sweet card. It's so much fun to play with. And additionally, I also think it's a card that could be potentially pretty good in the metagame right now, because the Alchemy metagame is very mid-range dominated. I think Grixis mid-range is probably the best deck right now. You've still got stuff like Anvil and Jund, which is all very mid-range focused. So Arcane Bombardment as a way to just go over the top of the other mid-range decks seems like it could be really well positioned right now. So if you're not familiar with this card, it's a 6-mana enchantment, and basically the way this works is the first instant or sorcery that you cast every single turn, when you do cast the instant or sorcery, it exiles an instant or sorcery at random from your graveyard, and it goes underneath the bombardment, and then you can cast that for free. And then every time you cast another instant or sorcery, you know, is the first one during each turn, it'll exile another one, and then you get to cast that for free as well. So you just stack up a bunch of instants or sorceries under the bombardment, and once this starts going, you get to cast, 2, 3, 4, 5 for spells for free every single turn cycle, which is so powerful and is just going to bury the opponent in card advantage. Now, the really nice thing that I like in this deck is that we get to run Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Crucius. These are probably the two most powerful cards in the format right now, and they both help you dig and ramp into it, which is really nice, because obviously the big downside of Bombardment is it's a 6-mana card that does nothing the turn you play it, which is usually a massive red flag. But being able to ramp into it ahead of curve and also have excess treasures lying around, so you can potentially cast a spell in addition to the bombardment the turn you cast it to get it going straight away, which is pretty nice. Korga also has a domain sub-theme going on, as you can see here, so mainly for Herb Migration, which seems like a really nice interaction here. So Herb Migration, you get to make a 3/3 for each basic land type among lands you control. So obviously, since they're running a domain mana base, we have the triomes here that help us get to all 5 land types pretty easily. And Herb Migration itself can help you hit it, because you can pay 2 and discard it to search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and you also gain 3 life, which is nice. So if you're missing red, green or black, you can obviously get the relevant basics of those colours. And they also have white and blue, a plains and an island. So if you already have the colours you need, you can use Herb Migration to help you get domain online, which is pretty nice. And then once this is in the graveyard, you can potentially exile it off the bombardment. So then every instant or sorcery that you cast, you're creating 4 or 5 3/3s every single time, which is such a powerful, late game engine essentially. Running domain also gives them access to drag to the bottom as a sweeper, which is pretty nice. And then they're also running a decent selection of other interaction. Assemble the Team and Perilous Iteration also seem pretty interesting here as well. Assemble the Team seems nice at finding bombardment, and then exiling it with bombardment lets you search the top third of your library every instant or sorcery that you cast, which seems pretty sick as well. Similarly with Perilous Iteration. Now, I'm a little less excited for the Perilous Iteration, because there does seem like there's a reasonable fail rate of this, where you could potentially hit an Arcane Bombardment before you get to 6 mana and have to discard it. But I'll have to see. I've not played with it in this shell, so we'll have to see how it plays out. And then the rest of the deck is, just ways to interact with the opponent. I do think this plays, or it should probably play out more like a control deck with Arcane Bombardment as a finisher, so I do think interaction is important. Now, one thing to note with Bombardment is you do need to be thinking about the type of interaction that you're running, because cards like Go for the Throat are obviously very important to be running, but if the opponent doesn't have any creatures in play and you exile it off the bombardment, it's kind of a whiff, and then it's not going to be doing anything. So you probably don't want to be going overboard on interaction that doesn't do anything if the opponent doesn't have anything in play, because you're kind of relying on the bombardment as your late game engine to run away with the game. So if you just exile a bunch of creature removal off it and the opponent doesn't put any creatures in play, then bombardment doesn't actually push you ahead. But I think they've done a reasonable job here. They've got Melt Through, which you can go face with if the opponent doesn't have any creatures in play. Molten Impact also hits Planeswalkers, which is nice. Terror Sunder you can kick to kill with any to deal with any permanent as well. But that is definitely something that I'm going to be mindful of going forwards. Now, in terms of things that stand out that I would potentially want to change. I mean, I haven't played any games with this. I'm going to play a bunch of matches without making any changes just to see what I think, because it's very hard to analyze decks without actually playing them yourself. But just at a first glance, the first thing that I would quite like to do, if possible, I mean, we'll have to see how important the domain payoffs are, but is potentially cut Drag to the Bottom and Herd Migration and see if we can come up with a build where we could use Crucius to tutor Bombardment just by discarding a 3-drop. Because if we cut Drag to the Bottom and Herd Migration and have nothing between Crucius and Arcane Bombardment in terms of mana value, we can use Crucius as a tutor for the Arcane Bombardment, which might mean that we don't necessarily need stuff like Assemble the Team. My other main concern is that Invoke Despair is everywhere right now, as you know, and Titan of Industry is also kind of commonly played because of the Gen Reanimated deck. And tapping out on turn 6 or potentially turn 5 and using a treasure for Arcane Bombardment and immediately getting it Invoke Despair seems quite rough. So I think I would personally quite like to be running a build that either runs more discard or more counter spells as a way to protect against that potentially. One other thing, or a couple of other things, whenever I've played domain builds in the past in Alchemy, the mana base has felt kind of rough, but I mean, Herd Migration should hopefully help with that. We'll see how it plays out. My other concern is with like sorcery speed things here. Even though there are aggro decks in the format, you know, having tapped lands for the mana base could be a concern, and having to tap out for kind of cards where you spin your wheels, like Assemble the Team and Perilous Iteration, could mean you kind of fall behind against the aggro decks. Even against the mid-range decks, I feel like the format right now is so important to be able to kill your opponent's Crucius before it activates. It's so important to be able to kill the opponent's 2/2 or Fable of the Mirror Breaker before it starts producing treasures. So I am a little concerned about, you know, potentially having to play a tap land, which means you don't have mana up to kill your opponent's Crucius, or, you know, having to tap out on turn 2 or 3 for an Assemble the Team or a Perilous Iteration, and then the opponent landing a Crucius and starting to snowball the game, because Alchemy is very snowbally right now in these mid-range decks. So those are my main concerns, but I'm really excited to try this out. I think the interaction between Herd Migration and Arcane Bombardment could be really sweet. I think Arcane Bombardment as a card in general, if you can figure out a build where you can kind of insulate yourself a little bit against Invoke Despair, seems like it could be a really nice way to close the game out. So what I'm going to do now is just play a bunch of matches with this deck without making any changes, see what I think of it. I'll show you some of the gameplay so you guys can see it as well, and then we'll discuss how I could potentially tweak the deck and different ways that you could build it going forward. So let's just get straight into the gameplay. Okay, sweet, here we go. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this looks good. You know, both Crucius and Fable on 3. We've got Herd Migration that we can channel to hopefully get Domain fully online. So obviously with the Proving Ground we get Jund Colours. So probably going to use this Herd Migration since we have pretty good mana already to find either a white or blue land. I think probably white's slightly better to get, but well, I guess it doesn't really matter because I think there's 4 of each off-colour triome, I think. So shouldn't really matter which one we get here, I don't think. Okay, so Battlefield Forge from the opponent and Trap Finder. Interesting, okay. Okay, sick. We got Bombardment now as well, which is great. So just going to pass here and then just channel the Herd Migration during the opponent's end step here. Probably just going to grab a Plains. And then, depending on what the opponent does here, probably either going to go for Fable or Crucius. If the opponent holds up interaction here, or if they hold open mana, I'll probably go for Fable. If they... Okay, so they are holding open mana, so you're probably going to go for Fable here then, just because we don't want Crucius to get killed by like a Go for the Throat or something. So Mardu Trap Finder from the opponent is interesting here. I'm not sure exactly what they're on, to be honest. Especially because this is Nerf Trap Finder, right? So it's not going to be Ominous Traveller. So it'll be interesting to see what the opponent's on here. So Fable resolves here. We'll see if they have a removal spell for the 2/2. Looks like they got something. Okay. Deadly Dispute the Trap Finder, sure. So that's kind of scary. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what they have, whether they've got the deck so that Trap Finder's consistently finding one creature, or if they just have, like, Trap Finder is more of a value card, which, you know, I think with the nerf, it probably is kind of now just going to be a value card, which is, to be honest, I think that's a lot better. When Trap Finder was just finding 1 or 2 targets, then that was when like the degenerate stuff was happening. Okay, so Crucius, so it does look like they've got Trap Finder for value, because Trap Finder can potentially hit Crucius in their list, which is interesting. I mean, it's pretty annoying that we don't have interaction here, because Crucius can just snowball the game if we don't find a way to kill it. Thankfully, we have one of our own, and the opponent's kind of tapped out here. Like, they'll get an extra treasure, assuming they activate the Crucius here, which does give them access to 2 mana, but... Okay, they go for Ambitious. So get to loot here. I'm definitely going to pitch a land and probably a Fable. We do want to have enough lands to be able to cast a Bombardment on curve. Okay, Terra Sunder's nice. That gives us an answer for the Crucius. So I'm going to attack first here, just so the opponent doesn't have an opportunity to kill the 2/2. You know, if we kill the Crucius, then there's a chance they kill the 2/2 before combat to prevent us getting the treasure. And attacking first means that they're much less likely to do that. So Terra Sunder giving us an out to the Crucius there is pretty nice, and then we should be able to play the Bombardment next turn. And the opponent's in Mardu colours, so we don't have to worry about counter spells. Now, Invoke Despair could be an issue. Sanguine Brushstroke's interesting. So I'm still not really sure what the opponent's playing here, to be honest. Okay, so their Trap Finder hit Trap Finder. I mean, maybe they're running a deck with like Cami of Morning. I've seen some decks like that where they use Cami of Morning on the Trap Finder, and then they can just repeatedly loop it from the graveyard over and over again. And since they have Blood Artist, it seems like that could be the sort of deck they're playing, maybe. So they get another Trap Finder trigger there. And then Fable transforms. We get to attack in with the 2/2, which is nice. And then we can just play Bombardment here. Now, obviously, Mardu, you know, they have access to white, so they could have access to a way to kill the Bombardment, but I can't really think of many main deck cards they would run, especially if they're running Deadly Dispute, which probably means they're running a pretty high creature count. Overwhelming Response, that's interesting. So, okay, that further solidifies they must be running a pretty creature-heavy deck to be able to run that. So, just got to hope, first of all, that they don't have a way to kill the Bombardment here. Like I said, if they're running a very creature-heavy deck, I very much doubt they can afford to run, you know, something like, I don't even know what they would run in white, like Soul Partition maybe, to kill it. And then we've also got to hope to find an instant or sorcery here. Now, thankfully, Crucius does help with that for sure. You know, even if we don't draw one off the top, we can potentially use Crucius to find us one. Okay, so the Trap Finder hit a Crucius. So still not entirely sure what the opponent's doing here. We haven't seen a Cami of Morning or anything like that. And to be honest, the 3 life off Herb Migration does seem pretty nice against, you know, Blood Artist. Seems like it would be very relevant against the Anvil deck as well. And the nice thing now is we don't have too much stuff in the graveyard, and regardless of whether we hit the Herb Migration or the Terra Sunder, we've got good targets for both. We could either kick the Terra Sunder to get rid of the Blood Artist, or if we don't have enough mana to kick it, we could go get rid of the Brushstroke. Okay, Extraction Specialist. So it does look like they're running some sort of like Graveyard Recursion with Trap Finder sort of deck. So I think we really want to find an instant or sorcery, so I think I'm going to lead on cycling the Xander's Lounge just to see if we can draw one off the top here. If not, we can just attack and then go play Crucius and try and get one off the discard. So get to attack here. I assume that's going to go through, or they would have probably used removal before combat if they were going to. Going to play the Triome instead of the Boseiju, because there's still a chance we might want to use the Boseiju to kill the Brushstroke. Now, that could definitely be wrong. You know, it could be better to... Oh, they have an overwhelming response for the Crucius. I was going to say it could be better to play out the Boseiju and use the Triome next turn to cycle in case we don't draw an instant or sorcery. So that could have been a bit greedy. Because to be honest, Brushstroke with only 1 blood token in play probably isn't going to do that much. But again, we don't know what else they're running. They could be running, you know, Wedding Announcement or something that we might want to kill with Boseiju. But either way, we could get punished for that. If we don't draw an instant or sorcery soon, this Bombardment is just going to kind of sit there doing nothing. So this is kind of a mental note to myself when I am building, you know, future variants of this deck, that I should definitely be running as high a count of instants or sorceries as possible. You know, obviously I want to retain the core of Fable and Crucius with it, because I think that's such a good way to build the deck. Balduvian Atrocity. Okay, I think I've seen this sort of deck before then, so that's pretty sick. They get to bring back Specialist, which also brings back something else. And with Blood Artist in play, that's going to deal a lot of drain because they both sacrifice and they get in for 3 as well. So yeah, they'll both sacrifice. They'll get 2 Blood Artist triggers. They'll get a Trap Finder trigger as well. So yeah, we really need to find an instant or sorcery here. Okay, so they get another Trap Finder trigger. And that's kind of scary because they could get another Atrocity off the Trap Finder, which would make it even cheaper to kick. So I think I'm going to go less on the Bombardment. Now, we could hit a land here, which could... Oh, okay. We got kind of punished there. I mean, to be honest, the odds might not be in our favour there. But I feel like we don't want the second Bombardment here. And yeah, maybe it would have been better to discard the Boseiju, but I feel like we have more value for the Boseiju than we do for the second Bombardment. But maybe that's wrong because the odds of us hitting a land there aren't that low. Whereas if we discard the Boseiju and pick Greater, the odds of us hitting an instant or sorcery are definitely higher. So maybe because we desperately needed to find an instant or sorcery there, it probably was better to pitch the Boseiju. So yeah, we might be in trouble there. That could cost us the game if we don't find an instant or sorcery here. I feel like this is the key turn. If we can find one here, we're probably alright. If we miss it for another turn, then it's going to be kind of rough. Especially because they have, you know, now they have their own Crucius going. They go Ambitious on Fable, so we'll have to see what the top end card is. Okay, we did miss again, but we can cycle the Triome here, so... I feel like I might have misplayed... Oh, okay, sick. So we did hit a sorcery. And this, I'm hoping to find an instant off here. If we can find an instant, we can potentially... Oh, wow. And we hit the Herb Migration. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned because of the Blood Artist here, to be honest. But if we can find an instant that can kill the Blood Artist... Oh, okay. Well, that's a pretty good instant that can kill Blood Artist. And we can fire that off during their upkeep. So if they're about to draw a Deadly Dispute, they're not going to get value off it. Okay, so they crack the research desk. So assuming we can kill the Blood Artist here, I actually think we've got a decent shot now because we're going to get another 5 tokens guaranteed, right? And if we hit the Terror Sunder, we can also kick it here. Oh, okay, we hit Assemble the Team. I mean, that's still pretty sick, right? That basically guarantees us another instant or sorcery for next turn. We get another 5 tokens in play. Now, if we couldn't kill... Hold on, let me think about this for a second. Sick, yeah, okay. Just get another Herb Migration here. Yeah, if we couldn't kill the Blood Artist, this would be a concern because if they somehow managed to kill a bunch of our tokens, then we could just get drained out by the Blood Artist, but we're in a pretty sick spot now. We have 10 3/3s in play and a 2/2, so even though they're at 17, we could very easily win next turn. You know, particularly if we play Herb Migration and hit another removal spell. Okay. That's kind of scary because they've got Atrocity. They can get back the Blood Artist off this, right? Or they can get back Extraction Specialist getting the Blood Artist, and then the Blood Artist sticks around. So this game definitely isn't over now, but if we can hit a removal spell off the Herb Migration, I think we're still good, right? We can go Herb Migration, kill the Blood Artist. I mean, to be honest, you know, most of the Blood Artist stuff would happen post-combat anyway, where we're hoping to have killed the opponent, so... Okay, and they're essentially tapping out. I mean, I guess they get another Crucius trigger, right? So they will have 2 mana open going into my turn, but I still feel like this is probably our game to lose now. So definitely going to block the Atrocity. Going to block with all of these just in case that, you know, if we just block with 2 and they have a removal spell for one of them, then that could leave us in a slight problem. But I mean, this is just safer to block like this, I think. Unless they have a way to give the Atrocity Death Touch or something, which is, you know, not very likely at all. So they do get 3 Blood Artist triggers here, which is kind of sketchy, but I still feel like if we can kill one of their creatures, we should be good. Right, they go up to 22, and we're attacking with... Well, it's still 10 3/3s. So, I mean, we'll see. If they have an instant speed piece of interaction, that could be an issue, but... So, I mean, I think we're just casting the Herb Migration here. I'm just trying to think what we could possibly hit off it. Or, you know, what we could hit off Assemble the Team, what we could hit from our graveyard off the Bombardment. I mean, I assume it's a piece of interaction, right? We should just have Go for the Throat and Tear Asunder. Okay, so we do hit the Tear Asunder. And we can kick it. I wish we could see what we hit off the Assemble the Team first, but unfortunately we can't do that. So I think we'll just take out the Blood Artist here. With the Tear Asunder, and then we'll Assemble the Team and Herb Migration. And then... Let's see what we want here. I mean, the only 1 mana card we could hit to cast off the treasure would be Melt Through, which we do have, but I feel like I want to get Tear Asunder just in case they have something weird and we need to be able to kill something next turn. I mean, we should be good to win here anyway. Like, they've got, even if they have 3 blockers, we're still getting through with, what would that be? Actually, no, wait, hold on. Okay, they scoop it up anyway. But yeah, I think unless they had another Blood Artist there, we should be good to win anyway. So this matchup, I think we definitely want the Hearses here because it does seem like their deck is pretty built around graveyard synergies. Tear Asunder was useful there, but it felt quite clunky having to consistently use it for 4 mana. Not quite sure about the Soul Transfer, to be honest. And what else? I mean, you could bring in an extra sweeper. Maybe they do seem like quite a go wide deck, right? Especially if they're bringing stuff back with the Extraction Specialist. So I could see going up to 4 drag to the bottom. And then what else do we want to cut here? Maybe go down to Perilous Iteration, because this, you know, it does seem like a potentially grindy matchup, but not sure how much we need that. So, I mean, Herb Migration off the Bombardment felt good there. That felt pretty sick. I mean, well, that basically just won us the whole game, but I do feel like I potentially misplayed as well. Maybe I should have saved the Triome, or both of the Triomes to cycle to help us find instants or sorceries sooner, because I feel like getting Bombardment online as soon as possible feels really crucial. I feel like, you know, we just about won that one. Had we had an instant or sorcery the turn after the Bombardment, I feel like we would have been like a lot safer, like significantly further ahead. So this hand seems fine. You know, we've got early interaction, we've got Herb Migration to pitch as well. I mean, I will say, I was going to say Herb Migration doesn't feel that great if we have a lot of lands already, but I guess we can just hold on to it to cast as a 7 mana card if we do end up flooding out. But yeah, it was obviously great with the Bombardment last game, so... My other concern, though, is if you find the Bombardment late and your graveyard's already full of instants or sorceries, there's a chance that you might not hit the Herb Migration quickly. But we'll see how it plays out here. So definitely going to play the Triome tapped here. See what the opponent does. Okay, we're pretty happy to see the Forsaken Crossroads. So that's a pretty slow start from the opponent. We do draw the Assemble the Team, but I feel like it's important to hold open interaction for Crucius here, which we obviously did see last game, so that is definitely a card we want to be able to kill on sight. And I guess that is one disadvantage of running Molten Impact, right? Molten Impact is one of the best removal spells in the whole format, but not being able to kill Crucius before it gets the first trigger is definitely a big drawback, considering how popular Crucius is in the format right now. You know, see, it's like a properly format-defining card. Okay, so opponent has the Haunted Ridge. Let's see what else they play. Okay, they do have the Crucius, so I'm very glad we held up and go for the Throat here. So now we get to kill the Crucius before they get any value off it. Wow, and we draw our own. Okay, that's pretty sick. So definitely going to run out our own here while the opponent shields down. And then I think I'll discard the Herb Migration here. You know, we already have enough lands. We kind of want it in the graveyard. Although, maybe I think I'll pitch the Jetmir's Garden actually, because I mean, I was thinking about going for the Herb Migration, but we don't really want tap lands that much if we can avoid it. And it's sick that we hit the bombardment as well. Okay, so they get back the Crucius, but that's only going to be for one turn. So yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% sure if pitching the Jetmir's Garden was right there, especially because, you know, now we have the bombardment, there is a chance that we might miss lands now. But we already have the 4th land, and we presumably get the 2nd treasure, unless the opponent has a 1-mana way to kill the Crucius here. And we can also, you know, we can cycle the Herd Migration to find a land, so I'm not too concerned about that. So going to cycle the Herd Migration here, and then, since we don't have an instant speed way to kill Crucius even if we wanted to, I think I'm just going to go for Assemble the Team here. Okay, I think I'm going to go for Hearst, because that does seem very good against their deck. You know, they do seem very reliant on the graveyard now. We could attack with the Crucius here. We're not going to be able to block the Menace creature, but they do run... you know, potentially run haste creatures, and this, you know, we're not winning with chip damage in this deck, I imagine. I think we're almost always going to be winning off Arcane Bombardment, just winning the late game, so I think preventing damage wherever we can is more important than just getting in for 3 damage there. Although having said that, I think that only haste creature is probably the Atrocity, which has Menace anyway, so maybe that was slightly wrong, but... So here, I think I'm going to go for the Hearst first. We could just go for the Bombardment, but I think it's more important to shut off their graveyard now, and then once we have their graveyard shut off, we can just go for Bombardment afterwards. Plus, oh yeah, okay, so opponent has Cathar Commando. I was going to say, plus there's a chance they have removal, and I would rather they use it like a Cathar Commando on the Hearst than the Bombardment. So I'm going to play out the 2nd Hearst while we have it here. Because I assume they'll kill the first one, yeah. So definitely want to take out the 2-drop so they don't get it back with Extraction Specialist. And then I'll take the Extraction Specialist as well, because they can get that back off another Atrocity. So now we have their graveyard unlocked. I feel like we have most of their powerful synergies shut down. So hopefully if we can now resolve the bombardment, that should start snowballing the game in our favour. So get to activate the Hearst here. And now cast the bombardment. Just got to hope they don't have another Cathar Commando here. And I'm going to hold on to this Triome here. You know, I feel like that cost us last game slightly by not having ways to dig for more instants and sorceries. Okay, so opponent attacks him with a Trap Finder. Okay, and they just pass. Interesting. So we'll exile the Overwhelming Response. And now shutting off their graveyard also makes the Overwhelming Responses a lot worse as well. So we could go Melt Through here, but we could just go Drag to the bottom to trigger the bombardment during our turn, and then Melt Through to trigger it during the opponent's turn. Now obviously using Drag to the bottom to kill a Trap Finder is awful, but getting Arcane Bombardment online seems really important here. We get Herd Migration. I mean, it gets instantly killed by the Drag to the bottom, but that's sick because now we can get Herd Migration off the Melt Through during the opponent's turn, which seems really nice. And we'll obviously get another card as well, so... Okay, the Trap Finder. I mean, I think I'll wait till their main phase 2 or potentially their end step to go for the Melt Through, because if we hit Drag to the bottom, we want to be able to kill as many of their creatures as possible. You know, we can stack it so Drag to the bottom resolves before the Herd Migration. So we sweep the board and then get the tokens. But yeah, obviously we have some other, you know, reasonable targets that we can hit off the bombardment as well. Okay, so we do hit the Drag to the bottom. So we get to kill the Atrocity and then make some tokens. And now I've just got to hope that we keep finding more instants or sorceries off the top. So definitely going to exile both the Trap Finders here so they can't bring either of them back. And draw a land, which is a little bit annoying, but thankfully we can cycle here. Don't find anything, but we're attacking him for 12 here. Puts them down to 6 already, so... Opponent's in trouble here, especially because it doesn't look like... Well, we didn't see any sweepers game 1. I don't know if they bring it in post-board, because until we get Herd Migration under bombardment, they don't really have to worry about our tokens. Okay, so they probably kill the bombardment here, but they're very much dead on board, right? Yeah, so they kill the bombardment. Okay, they do have Extraction Specialist, but that still won't save them, I don't think, right? Because even if they block with it, that puts them up to 9, and we have 4 3/3s, so... I mean, might as well crew up the Hearse just for maximum damage, but even if they block the Hearse with the Specialist, we still win here. Yeah, sweet, we got there, nice. Okay, so what do we think of the deck overall? Well, I think there's a lot of really cool stuff going on here for sure. I definitely think Arcane Bombardment has a lot of potential, and when you do set up Herd Migration plus Bombardment, that is so difficult for a lot of decks to beat. So this interaction is really sick when it pops off. And I do think, Crucius and Fable with Bombardment, Crucius and Fable being able to ramp into it, being able to dig for it, is really, really nice as well. In terms of changes, like, Herd Migration was really sick with Arcane Bombardment, but, you're not always going to hit it, right? If you have other instants or sorceries in your graveyard, you can't control what the Arcane Bombardment hits, and you are making some pretty considerable... or I guess there's considerable cost in terms of the mana base consistency to run the domain stuff. I did have some issues with the mana base. First of all, against aggro decks, having to play tap lands when you want to hold mana open for interaction did cost me a few games. And additionally, like I said, the format right now is so focused around snowballing with your Fable and Crucius and trying to stop the opponent snowballing with theirs. So I did also have some situations where I would have to play a tap land and not be able to hold mana open to be able to kill the opponent's Crucius or Fable, which did mean that I fell behind straight away, which is a little bit of a concern. So I think my builds going forwards, I'm going to try and see if I can make the deck work without the domain cards and setting up Crucius as a way to tutor the Arcane Bombardment by not running anything else that costs more than 3 mana. The other thing is that I don't even know if you necessarily need a big payoff spell like a Herd Migration or an Invoke Despair for Arcane Bombardment to be good enough, because this card should be able to, as long as you're running good quality instants or sorceries and a decent number of them, Arcane Bombardment alone should be good enough to snowball the game, I think. So I think my focus in builds is going to be trying to run good quality cheap spells and also run a decent number of instants. First of all, so that we can kill, opposing Fables and Cruciuses, which seems really, really important right now, as well as just being good against aggro as well. But also so that we can consistently trigger this on your turn and the opponent's turn, because while I think getting something like a Herd Migration or an Invoke Despair under Arcane Bombardment is sick, you're not guaranteed to get it because Arcane Bombardment exiles at random. And additionally, I feel like triggering it twice as fast by consistently hitting it on your turn and the opponent's turn is potentially more powerful anyway, because you snowball the game twice as fast if you can trigger it on both players' turns. So that's one thing I would like. This deck does have a reasonable number of instants in it, but I think I would like to run a few more. If I was going to run Domain, I'm not sure if that will be good enough. We'll have to test it out. But if you are to run Domain, I think this is a good starting point. A few things that I would potentially change. I might move Terra Sunder to the sideboard. I feel like this card, you need to be able to consistently get use out of the front half. Obviously, a ton of decks are running Fable. A ton of decks are running, obviously Anvil runs the Onikal Anvil, and Goblins run Goblin Influx Array and stuff like that as well. But there was a decent number of situations where I would have to wait until 4 mana to cast this, especially annoying if I was staring down something like a Crucius or a Fable that I would have been able to kill if this was something like Go for the Throat. So if I was going to, just keep this deck similar, I would probably just change some of the interaction, maybe move Terra Sunder to the sideboard, maybe move, Go for the Throat to Go for the Throats to the main deck, just so we can consistently kill Crucius a little bit quicker. Assemble the Team was actually, surprisingly good in the deck. Whenever I exiled it under Bombardment, it felt really, really good. But the other concern was, in the early game, having to tap out for this on turn 2 or 3 did mean that I fell behind on tempo against opposing Cruciuses and Fables. It did mean that I, often got overrun by opposing creatures. So I'm hoping that by setting it up so Crucius can tutor the Bombardment off its discard ability, we won't necessarily need to be as reliant on these sorceries. Perilous Iteration was decent in grindy games, but again, I felt like I just wanted more interaction. I felt like this deck is very much a control deck until you can set up the Bombardment, and I really didn't like having to tap out during my turn, and then the opponent potentially resolving a Crucius and then running away with the game a little bit. So I went away from this build and I wanted to keep with Jund for my first build of the deck, and I ended up on a Jund list that was running Jarsoul. So this was the first direction that I went with when I was building it. So, the first thing to note with this deck is that obviously we don't have anything that costs more than 3 outside of the bombardment, so now Crucius can tutor for the bombardment just by discarding a 3-drop, which I'm hoping, would improve the consistency without necessarily needing something like Assemble the Team to find it. And it was a lot nicer because, you don't have to make any deck building concessions to find your payoff card. All you need is a Crucius and a 3-drop in hand, which is much easier to set up and requires basically no deck building costs other than cutting the herb migration from the deck. I do think just being 3 colours and not being domain helped a lot with the mana base. So I'll just talk you through the other stuff that we got going on here. So one thing that I was quite mindful of when I was building this deck is to try and have the interaction still do something off Arcane Bombardment, even if the opponent didn't have any creatures in play or any cards in hand if we're talking about Mind Spike. So Mind Spike is a good example of this, right? It's essentially duress, where you lose 2 life when you cast it, and if the opponent doesn't have any targets for it, you get to draw a card. So even if the opponent's empty-handed, we can still just draw a card off this, which means, we're still getting advantage off bombardment, even if the opponent has nothing on the board, because you're playing a control deck, you're going to be killing the opponent's stuff on the board. And I did end up in situations with the domain build where I would have bombardment in play, and I would have killed the opponent's stuff, but I wasn't able to press ahead with the bombardment because it kept exiling creature removal, so I wasn't actually getting any advantage off the bombardment. So running stuff like Mind Spike means that we're still drawing cards even if the opponent's empty-handed. Now, losing 2 life off this is an issue, especially against Anvil and aggro decks, so I didn't want to be running too much, but I felt like it was important, particularly against cards like Invoke Despair. We have a couple more and a duress in the sideboard to be able to try and get rid of Invoke Despair, because that was another issue that I came across with the domain build. It didn't really have that many ways to stop Invoke Despair, which is a bit of an issue. Then again, I'm not 100% sure this was right, but I went for Melt Through as my 1 mana interaction because this is a card that can just go face, even if the opponent has no creatures in play. Now, I could potentially see swapping this out for Strangle, because that's just a generically good interaction piece that can hit creatures and planeswalkers, so the chances of it whiffing aren't that high. And we've also got You Line Up the Shot, which is just, a cantrip that can also give us interaction for flyers and ways to kill artifacts or enchantments. So again, another card that's nice to get back with the bombardment, because you're just using it to draw a card every turn, using it to get naturalized if we're up against an Oni-Cult Anvil or, any problematic artifacts or enchantments seems pretty nice. I did feel like we need some number of Go for the Throat as a way to kill Shieldred. We are essentially a control deck, so we're not going to win if the opponent just sits with a Shieldred in play. I wanted to maximize Undercity Plunder because that seemed like a card that was very good in the metagame and also just very good with bombardment because, it's just good against other mid-range decks. The opponent either has to discard 2 or you get one of the cards out of their deck. And it's really sick with bombardment because you're guaranteed to get a card even if the opponent's completely empty-handed. And then Cathartic Pyre is an example of the type of interaction that I really want to be running in this sort of deck. So deal 3 to a creature or planeswalker. Really nice right now because it can kill Crucius or Fable, the 2/2 from Fable, even if you're going second. Can also hit planeswalkers, which is very relevant. And at worst, we can use this to loot. So even if we do hit this off the bombardment and the opponent has no creatures in play, we can still use this to just loot away lands and find better stuff, which seems like, the fail rate on this with bombardment is pretty nice. And then Fable and Crucius I really wanted to keep as like the core engine of the deck that can help us find the bombardment. And then since we're running a decent, curve of stuff, Jar's still allowing us to flash back these as extra interaction, and then you've got a decent number of 2 mana stuff that you're happy to hit off it as well. Seemed like a nice extra threat that helps us pull ahead in terms of card advantage. And then I moved the Perilous Iterations to the sideboard for the grindy matchups. We've got more interaction. Rotten Reunion seems nice as Graveyard Hate because you really want a high number of instants or sorceries. You don't want to be left in a situation where you have bombardment on the battlefield and then you don't have an instant or sorcery and it just sits there doing nothing. So Rotten Reunion over Unlicensed Hearse allows you to still shut off stuff like Assemble the Parts or, gets rid of spells for Jarsil and triggers bombardment twice because it has flashback as well. And then we've got some additional interaction, some sweepers as well. Now, I played with this deck a fair bit and it felt powerful for sure. And I do think that cutting Herb Migration for cheaper spells definitely does work if you can consistently trigger bombardment on both yours and the opponent's turn. But the issue I had with this deck was that it just felt like a worse version of the Jund Reanimator deck. Jund Reanimator, I feel like it just has more impact straight away. you know, Titan of Industry has such more immediate impact than Arcane Bombardment, especially if you don't have a spell to cast the turn you play the bombardment. And on the flip side, I felt like this particular build was also very weak against Gender Reanimator because we didn't really have a good way to stop the Titan of Industry. So I started looking at other ways to build the decks in different colours. So the first way that I went was potentially trying a Mardu variant for a few different cards here. So Sunset Revelry, you know, leaning very much into the control, interact with your stuff, gain life against the aggro decks, produce tokens. Union of the Third Path seemed like another card that was very good at consistently producing card advantage with the bombardment, that also ensured you never get burnt out by a deck like Anvil. You're constantly gaining life so you don't, you know, lose to decks like Mono Red or Goblins that compress your life total. You know, we've got Fragment Reality as our interaction. Because of the life gain, we can afford to run more Mind Spikes, and we can use Fragment Reality on our own creatures to be able to get a Geist Blaster. And then the other nice upgrade that we get in this deck is Divine Purge, which I think is a really nice card right now. But having played with this deck, the big issue was, first of all, the mana base in these colours is pretty horrendous. We don't have a Triome, and so the mana consistency wasn't much better, if at all better, than the Domain build, which is one of the slight issues I had with that variant. And honestly, you know, the deck just felt really clunky. We didn't have that many ways to kill opposing Fables or Cruciuses, and just overall I wasn't super impressed with this build. However, the build that I was the most impressed with, and this is a deck that I've done quite a lot of work on over the past couple of days, was a Grixis build. And this version of the deck, I feel like, irons out a ton of the issues that the previous versions of the deck that I've tried had. So, again, we have Crucius tutors the Arcane Bombardment by discarding a 3-drop, which is, again, really sick. I don't feel we want more than 3 copies of Bombardment because you'll end up with clunky hands otherwise, but 3 copies of Bombardment plus Crucius being able to tutor it means you find it very consistently. In terms of the spells we got, I really, really like Consider. You know, one of the weaknesses of the Jund build was that you line up the shot, if you're just using it to draw cards, is pretty mediocre, to be honest. Whereas Consider, the fact you get a Surveil, and the fact that, you know, it's an instant, so you can trigger it on the opponent's turn, is really nice. It means you can have situations where you have 7 mana going into your Bombardment turn off treasures. You can go Bombardment, Consider to trigger it straight away. Or, you know, you can have situations where you go Bombardment, play another spell to trigger it, and then as long as you have 1 mana, you can fire off Consider during the opponent's turn to trigger it during their turn. And honestly, like, I do feel like being able to trigger Bombardment on your turn and the opponent's turn without running a payoff like Herb Migration is good enough, because you're getting spells under the Bombardment twice as fast, essentially. Same thing as before. I think Mind Spike is really nice, especially against the Invoke Despair decks, at just clearing the way so you don't immediately get Invoke Despair off the Bombardment. Again, I don't want to be running more than 2 in the main deck because of the life loss, but I like having an extra 2 for the slower decks where the life loss isn't as relevant. 3 Go for the Throat. I still feel like this is important to be able to kill Shieldred. Even though it can be a whiff off the Bombardment, I still feel like it's important. And we have the 4th copy in the sideboard for matchups where we need to be able to kill bigger creatures. Cathartic Pyre was a card that has consistently impressed me over the different variants I've built, because it can kill most of the creatures that we want to be able to kill. You know, like I said, I think the 2 most important ones to kill on curve are Crucius and Fable, and this does that there great as well. The fact that you can discard and draw, you know, it is card disadvantage if you cast it from your hand, but it can filter. You know, if you're missing land drops, it's really good at digging for lands. We also have cards that can be cast from the graveyard, like Siphon Insight, so we can turn it card neutral if we're discarding one of them. And in general, it's just decent to exile with the Bombardment, because even if the opponent doesn't have anything in play, we can put this on the stack first, and we have so many other cards in the deck that either draw us a card or put a card into our hands somehow. You know, Consider, Maestro's Charm, Bind to Sorcery, Siphon Insight, all put cards into our hands. So if we put Cathartic Pyre on the stack first, and then put other spells on the stack, we can then put cards into our hand, and then potentially cycle them away if they're not great, to be able to find more stuff. So Cathartic Pyre, interaction that always does something off the Arcane Bombardment, even if the opponent has nothing in play. And Bind to Secrecy is a really, really big addition to the deck, because even though we do have discard spells in some numbers, I still felt like Invoke Despair was a really big issue for this deck. And just other, you know, enchantment removal in general. You know, people are running enchantment removal because of cards like Fable and Cabaret Revels and stuff like that. So having Bind to Secrecy as a way to protect the Bombardment is really sick. But, you know, similar to Cathartic Pyre, this also has something that it can do even if the opponent doesn't have anything on the stack. You know, the big issue with running counter spells in a Bombardment deck, if you're running like Make Disappear, is if you exile the Make Disappear onto the Bombardment, it's only really useful if you cast an instant during the opponent's turn, and then you can cast it. Whereas Bind to Secrecy, allowing you to get a copy of your opponent's cards in the graveyard into your hand, means that it's sick to exile with the Bombardment, because even if nothing's going on, you can just get a copy of your opponent's best creature from the graveyard. And if the opponent does cast something problematic, we have so many instants in the deck that we can just cast to Consider, then cast the Bind to Secrecy underneath the Bombardment as a counter spell to stop the opponent's stuff. So that's really sick. Additionally, we can, if we get a Bombardment, or if a creature that we get off the Bind to Secrecy has mana value 4 or higher, we can get the 5 or more mana values online on this as well, which gives us an additional card, most of which are good to discard to the graveyard or give us an extra instant or sorcery to trigger the Bombardment. So Bind to Secrecy really helps to protect the Bombardment, really helps to stop stuff like Invoke Despair, opposing Fable of the Mirror Breakers, opposing discard spells which are going to be brought in against you because you're running such a powerful late game card. So Bind to Secrecy felt like such a big addition to the deck, and really helps to fix the issue that I had against Invoke Despair. Then we've also got Siphon Insight. So originally I had 4 Undercity Plunder in the main deck and 4 Siphon Insight in the sideboard, but having played more with this deck, I feel like Siphon Insight in the main deck is just better because you really want to be holding up mana. You want to be playing Draw Go a lot of the time, and so Siphon Insight being an instant is really, really huge. Because, tapping out for an Undercity Plunder on turn 2 and then not having mana open to be able to Cathartic Pyre the opponent's Crucius was a big issue, for example. And then the fact this has flashback means that it's good to discard to Pyre, to Fable, to Crucius. We can mill it over off Maestro's Charm. So Siphon Insight just seems great as a main deck card in general right now. Obviously, not as good against the aggro decks, but we can cut it post-sideboard. But generally, since the format is very mid-range focused, this is just going to run away with card advantage. And again, it's another card that's great to exile with the Arcane Bombardment, because we just get one of the opponent's cards in our hand every single turn, which is nice. Then Fable and Crucius, obviously really crucial to be able to find and ramp into the Bombardment. And then Maestro's Charm is a really nice card. Again, I've been really focused on trying to have pieces of interaction that are flexible and do other stuff to help pull us ahead if we're at parity, because like I said, the issues I was having previously is when you remove all the opponent's stuff, you want Bombardment to be able to pull you ahead, so you want your interaction to be able to do other things as well. And the fact that this can deal 5 damage to a creature or Planeswalker means you can kill basically every problematic card in the format. It can kill Shieldred, it can kill, Tasha if they plus it. It can kill basically every creature you want to be able to. You get to look at the top 5, put one of those into your hand and the rest into your graveyard, which is great at, first of all, helping you find the Bombardment, but just helping you find whatever you need. The fact it fills the graveyard means it puts instants or sorceries in the graveyard for Bombardment, so you're not going to run out of stuff to do there. You can get Siphon Insight into the graveyard, which allows you to cast it for flashback. It can help you get 5 or more mana values in your graveyard, so Bind to Secrecy gets you an extra card as well. And then you also have the ability to drain the opponent for 3, which is so huge right now. There are a couple decks, specifically mono red burn or mono red aggro, and Anvil, that are very good at draining you out. And so having Maestro's Charm as a way to just buffer your life total every single time that you can recur off the Bombardment just means that this is a card that is great to play on turn 3 and perfect to exile off the Bombardment as well. Then mana base wise, 24 lands has felt like a decent amount overall. We have so many ways to find lands as well. Obviously, Arcane Bombardment's a 6 mana card, so you really want to be drawing it to at least land 4 or 5 if you've got treasures alongside it. And we have so many ways to find lands. That's another benefit of Siphon Insight as well. You want to keep hitting land drops, and Siphon Insight being able to find lands out of the opponent's deck is really huge to make sure you keep hitting land drops. But we've also got Cathartic Pyre, we've got Consider, we've got Fable and Crucius, and Maestro's Charm. So even though we've only got 24 lands, we can always find, or almost always find lands if we need to. And sideboard, we got 2 copies of Mind Spike, extra discard that is not dead off the Bombardment. Now, I have had some issues with this where the life loss really does add up, so I could potentially see swapping this out for Duress, but right now I like the Mind Spike. As I said previously, I like Rotten Reunion as Graveyard Hate that provides 2 triggers for the Bombardment, which is really nice. And it's also, in matchups where you want the Graveyard Hate, like against Gen Reanimator, it's a nice card to exile onto the Bombardment, because then if you cast an instant, you can then just get instant speed Graveyard Hate at any time. That's another reason why I really want to be running a lot of instants, because if you exile a card like Rotten Reunion or Bind to Secrecy under the Bombardment, you can just trigger that as an interaction during the opponent's turn by casting it underneath the Bombardment. Extra go for the throat if the opponent's running bigger creatures. Malicious Malfunction is a sweeper. Now, I could potentially see swapping this out for Brotherhood's End, because I have had some matchups against Anvil where if they have a start with 1 or 2 Anvils, we don't have any artifact removal, so I could potentially see swapping this out for Brotherhood's End, but if they don't have a very anvil-heavy hand, this denying them the Blood Artist triggers is really nice. It's also very good against mono-red goblins and mono-red aggro. Specifically against goblins, it stops Randall Hordemaster as well, but on balance, I could potentially see swapping this out for Brotherhood's End. Then we've got 4 cut down. I feel like it's important to have a lot of cards for the aggro matchup, because we do have a decent number of cards that are kind of slow there. You know, we don't want Mind Spike, and Siphon Insight and Bind to Secrecy can be a little slow in the matchup, so we do want a decent amount of interaction to bring in there as well to slow the opponent down. And then we've got 4 copies of Undercity Plunder for the more mid-range decks where we don't need as much interaction. Now, I'm not sure we need all 4 copies, so I could potentially see cutting 2 of this for a bit more creature interaction. But in general, I really like this build. I feel like this is a deck that is good without the bombardment, but all the cards in the deck work really well with the bombardment as well. And I honestly felt with the Jund build that, you know, it was strong, but it didn't really match up very well against what other decks were doing. Particularly, you need to be able to stop the opponent's Fables and Cruciuses and stuff like that. So this has definitely felt like the strongest build out of stuff that I've tried. So next up, I've just got some matches with the deck I'm just going to show you. I managed to 5-0 with the very first build of this deck, as you can see here. And so I'm going to play you a match from the very first league I did. Then I played a second league afterwards, and I felt like I had a pretty bad matchup against the Jund Reanimated deck, because Titan of Industry is obviously insane against the Arcane Bombardment. If you spend your turn 6 tapping out for this, and then they follow that up with a Titan of Industry destroying the Bombardment, that's really bad. Obviously, Rotten Reunion does help in that matchup, but it doesn't stop the hardcast Titan of Industry. So, having played a second league where I went 3-2, losing to Jund Reanimator twice, one change that I made since then is cutting the Rotten Reunion for... Hold on, what's the card called? Something of Steel. Let's search it on here. Dreams of Steel and Oil, that was it. So this card basically is a discard spell that exiles an artifact or creature from their hand and their graveyard. So this can be used to get rid of Titan of Industry from their hand to stop them hardcasting it. It can get rid of Titan Industry from the graveyard to stop them reanimating it. And it can get rid of Unlicensed Hearse before they start shutting off your graveyard as well. So I made that change and then ran it through another league, and then I'm going to show you a match from that league as well. So anyway, let's just get straight into the gameplay. Okay, so we're on the draw here. And not a super exciting hand, but I definitely think this is a keep. You know, we've got early interaction, we've got enough lands, so we've got a lot of good top decks as well. Even if we do end up massively flooding out, we've still got Cathartic Pyre to loot at worst. Now, I'm not super keen on that in general because it is card disadvantage, but, you know, it's nice to have the option in case we do completely flood out. But yeah, either way, like, having early interaction to be able to kill Fable or Crucius on curve seems really key right now, so definitely going to keep this. So opponent plays Forsaken Crossroads on blue, so it could be a number of things. Okay, blue-black doesn't really help us. Okay, Ledger Shredder, interesting. So definitely kill that before it starts getting connive value, so we'll just Cathartic Pyre. Now this does mean that we are potentially vulnerable to Crucius if they go, you know, red source into Crucius, but you know, they might. We don't even know if they're playing Grixis, and I feel like letting Shredder untap and start getting them value is too risky in general. Okay, they go for Seek New Knowledge, sure. So, since we saw Shredder, I have to imagine, and we haven't seen a third colour yet, but makes me think they're probably on an Oracle of the Alpha deck with like Rusko and what else is in that deck? Like maybe Cyber Siphoner or something like that. So Rusko would be annoying. Okay, they plunder us. So, I mean, I have to assume they're probably, like, if they are playing the deck, I think they are. It is going to be kind of a grindy matchup. So plunder, getting them like a guaranteed 2-for-1 when we can stop that, is probably worth stopping. So I'm just going to use the Bind to Secrecy now. And if they are playing the deck, I think they are. They're not going to have that many powerful cards unless they're running like Planeswalkers potentially. You know, if they're running Tasha or like Teferi or something, that could be an issue. But if they're running like lists that I've seen, like Croaky's list, then I think that's a perfectly fine target to use the Bind to Secrecy on. Now, unfortunately, we are flooding out a little bit, but like I said, we can always use Pyre as a way to loot as like a... if we really need to. And we want to be hitting 6 lands anyway, so that if we do draw Arcane Bombardment or, Crucius as a way to tutor the Bombardment, we can cast it. So flooding out is a little bit annoying, but the opponent's also not pressuring us really, so shouldn't be too much of a concern. Okay, piece it together. Let's see what else they got here. Okay, so they're just going to pass. I think I'm going to fire off the Cathartic Pyre now then, if they're not going to do anything. Just to try and find something better. So I'm going to get rid of the red sources here. Okay, perfect. So we hit the Bombardment and a Mind Spike and a Fable. That's pretty sick. So I'm going to lead on the Mind Spike here just to see what they got going on. I have to imagine they have a decent amount of interaction here if they've just not done anything other than play Ledger Shredder. Yeah, okay, so they've just got creature interaction by the looks of things. Now, obviously going for the Throat is generally a better card, but I want to play Fable this turn, and I assume they kill the 2/2 considering they have 3 pieces of interaction. And if I leave them with the Fading Hope, they'll just get a Scry when they use the Fading Hope. So I would rather... I mean, we could get punished for that if we draw Crucius and they use a Fable to kill that, but I would rather just deny them the Scry at this point, because we're already at a point in the game, assuming that last card in their hand is a land, where it's very attrition based already. So I would rather not give them the Scry. Now again, thinking about it, if we do draw Crucius, we could get punished for that, but actually no, having said that, if we take the go for the Throat with Mind Spike, they'll just Fading Hope the token anyway and go for the Throat Crucius. So yeah, I think that was the right play, considering we were going to go for Fable that turn. Okay, so they tack Anima for Shredder. So I assume they go Shredder into Removal Spell to get a Connive here. Be interesting to see if they discard the go for the Throat, because we are going to get... Okay, they do. We are going to get the Reflection in 2 turns, but I guess that is quite a ways away. So really got to hope they haven't drawn a counterspell here. If they've drawn a counterspell, okay, sick. That's perfect, because I don't think Dimir has any way other than Invoke Despair, which I very much doubt they're running, to kill Bombardment. The only way... okay, Rusko is a bit annoying, but I think the only way that they could potentially remove the Bombardment here is with Otawara, which they already have in play, and I very much doubt they're running 2 Otawaras. So I think Bombardment should be good to stick in play here, which is obviously great for us. Okay, so we're definitely going to go for the Throat here. Since we drew Bind to Secrecy, like I was going to go for the Throat, the Shredder, but since we drew Bind to Secrecy, I want to go for the Rusko. Okay. So we're getting punished for that. If I'd known we were going to hit the Cathartic Pyre, then I definitely would have gone go for the Throat on the Shredder, and then we can Cathartic Pyre the Rusko. But I want to Bind to Secrecy, getting a copy of Rusko here. And if we'd have hit something like a Mind Spike, then we wouldn't have been able to do that. Okay, so opponent just draws a land, so I'm going to Bind to Secrecy here, get a copy of the Rusko, and then... I mean, we'll see what else we hit off the Bombardment. We don't want to use the Cathartic Pyre here if we don't hit... Well, Cathartic Pyre doesn't really do anything. Okay, go for the Throat, perfect. So now we can kill the Shredder. They do get a Connive, but they're just going to discard it straight away. They don't really get any card selection here, so... We get to kill the Shredder, get a copy of the Rusko. Now, the opponent is going to refuel off the clock in like a turn or two, but I think we should be so far ahead at that point that it shouldn't really matter. So we'll get a Rusko in play a Fable, which triggers the Rusko, and now we've got our own clock going. If we draw another instant or sorcery, then we're getting Pyre plus go for the Throat plus like maybe a Bind to Secrecy or a Mind Spike. So what have we got here? We got another Pyre, Mind Spike, 2 binds. So I would really like to get Bind to Secrecy under the Bombardment, and then any instant for the rest of the game can be used as a counterspell off the Bombardment, which is really sick, obviously. So yeah, opponents... What's that? 9... Yeah, so they're going to trigger the Midnight Clock going into our turn. Which I guess it makes sense for them to do that in case, we could potentially draw in a Braid. Like, obviously we're not running that, but the opponent doesn't know that, so... Definitely discard a land here. Really want to find an instant. Okay, perfect. So now we can go Maestro's Charm. Look at the top 5, hopefully for another instant. Trigger the Rusco, trigger the Bombardment. Okay, we hit Mind Spike. So, going to put the Cathartic Pyre on the stack first, just so we have the option of discarding something if we do draw it. Okay. So we could get rid of the Piece It Together, but I don't feel like at 2 we need to be that worried about it. So I'm going to take the Seek New Knowledge because that has the most potential to fix their hand. And then just going to take another Maestro's Charm here. And we get to mill a Siphon Insight, so I think we're in a really sick spot now. I'd be very surprised if we lost this. You know, we can either Maestro's Charm or Siphon Insight. We can start using Maestro's Charm as like a burn spell here, essentially, if we wanted to. And we've got the Midnight Clock going as well, so I think the only way... okay, there's the Oracle of the Alpha. I was going to say, I think the only way the opponent could win here is like combo killing us somehow. And I guess if they go like Oracle into suddenly draw Time Walk and then loop it somehow, they could potentially win, but they'd have to get very lucky to do that. They do top on Fading Hope. And they can draw that card off the top with Piece It Together here, which is kind of scary. But I mean, again, we're still at 16. The Bombardment can be used as like 2 removal spells here, so we could go, or potentially 3, you know, if they played another 2 creatures, we could Maestro's Charm to deal 5 damage, then use Go for the Throat and Pyre off it. So I'm going to use the Maestro's Charm now just to get another trigger off the Rusco. You know, we could wait to see if they play another creature, but I think with 3 mana and only 1 unknown card, it's pretty unlikely, so... Okay, they also Fading Hope the Fable, sure. Okay, they fire off Consider. There's Ancestral Recall. That's kind of scary. But we can Cathartic Pyre to be able to discard. We can go for the Throat here, and then we don't need to worry about the last Go for the Throat. So we get to kill the Oracle, and we get a bunch of Rusco triggers as well. So we're going to be triggering the Midnight Clock at the beginning of our next turn now. I think we want to pitch the Fable. I mean, it doesn't really matter here, right? Because we're going to be getting rid of our hand at the beginning of our turn anyway, so... And then the Rusco dies. So I think, I mean, I kind of want to go Consider during the upkeep to get another card underneath the Bombardment, because the annoying thing about using Midnight Clock here is we're not going to have anything in the graveyard for the Bombardment. Okay, Siphon Insight's pretty nice. I mean, Cathartic Pyre doesn't really matter here. So we get to Siphon Insight, and then won't bother about the Pyre, because we don't want to cycle if we're going to get a completely new hand anyway. Going to take Go for the Throat here, just as extra interaction. Okay, opponent doesn't have anything in their hand. I mean, I guess, again, since the Midnight Clock's about to trigger, it doesn't really matter what we pick off the Consider here. And then we get a full new Grip. And I think it's probably worth... I mean, we can kill the opponent with Maestro's Charm here, but... I mean, we're so far ahead, I'm happy to just... You know, keep going for a bit longer, see what we hit. So, Maestro's Charm. Okay, we hit another one. I mean, yeah, I probably should just go for the Drain 3, but I haven't played with Bombardment in a while, and I'm really enjoying this, so... Opponent did find Time Walk. Okay, we'll just finish it off with the Maestro's Charm here. I mean, they could have a counter spell. Yeah, I mean, that was unnecessarily risky on my part. I should have just gone for the Drain 3 straight away. We hit another Maestro's Charm anyway. But yeah. Okay, yeah, that was really greedy of me, but like I said, I've not played with Bombardment in a while, so... Okay, so sideboard-wise here... interesting. I mean, we definitely still want creature interaction to be able to kill Rusco, because that can drain us out. We definitely want creature removal to be able to kill Oracle, so they don't just scry a bunch, but I feel like the main deck's already pretty well set up. I don't want to go too heavy on Mind Spike, because they do run Rusco. If they weren't running Rusco, then I would probably go up on Mind Spikes, just as a way to clear the way for us to, you know, resolve our bombardments and stuff, because I do imagine they're probably going to be bringing counter spells against us. Very much doubt they've got Invoke Despair, so I think once we get the bombardment into play, we don't really have to worry about it, but like I said, we want creature removal for their threats still, so we can't afford to bring in too many Undercity Plunders, and I think we do want some number of Mind Spike, but like I said, since they have Rusko, I don't want to be losing too much life off that, because they can just drain us out, even if we do end up far ahead in the mid to late game. Okay, so obviously on the draw here, and I can't keep a one-lander, unfortunately. Wow, I can't keep a one-lander there either. So down to 5, which is a bit rough. I think we'll put back a Consider here. I want to keep all 3 lands, and then I want to keep Fable as well. So it's just between Siphon, or maybe we put back Fable. I don't know. This is tough. Maybe put back Siphon Insight. Although I don't know, when you're down to 5, Siphon Insight acting as the 2th one can help you get back in the game. But I feel like I want some interaction here, and Fable is just potentially good enough to smooth our draws out anyway. So okay, Cathartic Pyre is nice. That gives us a way to kill anything they play on turn 2 or 3. Like a Legislator, for example. Yeah, perfect. So just going to fire off the Pyre now before they start getting Connive value. Well, yeah, that was definitely greedy of me last game. I should have just gone for the Maestro's Charm draining straight away, but because they could, you know, if I'd have lost that with them having a counter spell, that would have been a real punt on my part. But so we do probably want to kill the Oracle of the Alpha, but I don't think letting them get a single scry is too bad. And you want to get Fable into play as soon as possible so it starts snowballing a bit quicker. If they have a counter spell, this hand becomes a lot worse if we can't get Fable in play, because having drawn Siphon Insight is pretty nice here, because it turns the looting effect into mana positive if we can discard the Siphon Insight, because we can cast it from the graveyard. So yeah, getting Fable into play seems important there, even though they do get a scry off the Oracle. And to be honest, you know, Oracle getting them a scry is something that we don't want to let snowball, but oh wow, Tollers. Okay, that's not a card I expected, but that's kind of annoying, because that's gonna, you know, we're already on a mull to 5. That's gonna potentially put them even further ahead on card advantage. But oh wow, we hit the bombardment. That's sick. So we did miss out on our 4th land though, which is a potential issue. But we do have the bombardment, which is, you know, even if the opponent does get ahead on card advantage, bombardment is the way that we pull ahead even further. So definitely play Crucius now while they have their shields down. I think I'm going to discard the Maestro's Charm and just go Lesser to try and find a land, because we want to have access to go for the throat this turn if we need it. And even if we don't want to go for the throat, like, I don't think we're really too worried about killing Tollaz or Oracle of the Alpha. We generally want to have the cheaper spell so that we have more of a chance of playing bombardment and casting a spell the same turn, so that we trigger it immediately. Okay, so they attack with the Oracle. So they are getting a decent amount of value off the Scry, but they're also stuck on 3 lands by the looks of things. So okay, so we'll play the Sulphur Springs, and I think we'll just play the Bombardment here. Definitely don't want to offer the trade, because Crucius is just going to help fix our hand. And then I think now we have Arcane Bombardment in hand, we just want to try and find instants or sorceries for the Bombardment. You know, obviously it might seem crazy getting rid of Fable because it's such a generically powerful card, but we don't really have great ways to maximize Reflection of Kiki Jiki in this deck. And once we have Bombardment in play, instants and sorceries are by far the most important thing in the deck. So them having Shredder alongside Tollaz is pretty annoying, because they get to, you know, everything they connive off the Shredder goes underneath the Tollaz. So I think killing the Tollaz before it gets too much more value is quite important here. But the annoying thing is with Bombardment and Shredder is that playing an extra spell underneath the Bombardment triggers the Shredder. So they are going to get a lot of value off Tollaz here. So I think we'll lead on, go for the throat on the Tollaz. If we do cast what's under the Bombardment, they will get another Scry, another Connive, but now we've hit Maestro's Charm, I think it's worth it. We get to guaranteed kill the Shredder here, even though they do get another card underneath the Tollaz before it dies, which is a bit annoying, because they get 3 cards off this now. But in Dimir colours, I don't think they have a good way to beat, or to get rid of Bombardment now it's in play. And we have Siphon Insight here to be able to cast during the opponent's turn to trigger it again. So even though the opponent did get a lot of value off that, I think we're just going to start pulling ahead here. So again, I don't really think we want Fable here. I'd rather get an instant or sorcery. Okay, Bind to Secrecy is nice. So if they do have a way to kill Bombardment, we now have an answer for it. Viconia could be an issue, because that can... If they save mana for that, that can just clear our graveyard so that we don't have stuff to cast off the Bombardment. So potentially want to fire off the Siphon Insight now, because if we wait, they can activate Viconia in response to the Bombardment trigger to stop. You know, they can just exile the most important instant or sorceries from our graveyard. Okay, we get Bind to Secrecy, so that allows us to copy Shredder or Tollers, which is pretty nice. So I think we'll get a copy of Tollers start off with, or Shredder. Not sure what the best option is here. I'm going to go for the Tollers just because it's, you know, more value, and then we get to Maestro's Charm to kill the Oracle of the Alpha here. And we get the Siphon Insight as well, so Bombardment should be good enough to get us pretty far ahead here, I think. I'm going to take the Plunder over the Consider. You know, there is definitely an argument for keeping Consider because that is a way for us to trigger Bombardment during the opponent's turn for really cheap, but I think Plunder should be pretty good here. You know, should help us pull even further ahead of the opponent. And it'd be interesting to see if they keep mana open for Viconia, because if they don't, I mean, it doesn't really matter if they do or they don't, because we already have Maestro's Charm underneath the Bombardment. So even if we have nothing in the graveyard, we can still just use the Maestro's Charm to kill the Viconia anyway. Okay, so it looks like opponents considering their options. They only have blue mana available. So, okay, so they exile to go for the throat. So whatever we cast next isn't going to get anything new under the Bombardment. But like I said, we've already got Maestro's Charm and Bind to Secrecy underneath it. So, so they've tapped out. So that now gives us the ability to... We could potentially cast Plunder with full control mode on. So I'm going to go into full control here. Cast the Plunder. And with the Bombardment trigger on the stack, I'm going to cast Bind to Secrecy. And now that guarantees the Bind to Secrecy will go underneath the Bombardment. Had they left the mana open, then we wouldn't have been able to do this because they could exile the Bind in response to the Arcane Bombardment trigger. But now we have two binds under here. So now we can just, you know, make copies of, you know, Ledger Shredder and whatever else they've got going on in the graveyard. So I think we'll just make more copies of Shredder, to be honest. And then we can use the Maestro's Charm to kill the Viconia. Okay, sick, we got there, nice. So that felt pretty good. Okay, so we're going second here. And yeah, this looks pretty decent. You know, we've got early interaction for creatures and Bind to Secrecy for non-creatures as well, and Consider a Mind Spike. So this looks pretty decent. Having Consider should help us find extra lands or like dig towards Fable and Crucius as well, which should help us like bridge to the mid to late game. Okay, so opponent plays Crossroads on blue. Definitely going to lead on the Triome here. See what the opponent's on. Okay, so they're on Esper. So just going to pass here. Definitely want to hold up Cathartic Pyre in case they play something like Diviner of Fates. They just passed back. So I think I'm just going to fire off Consider here. And we'll definitely take an Arcane Bombardment. So now we've got our payoff card, which is pretty sick. So, and we draw Crucius. I mean, I don't want to play Crucius when they've just passed and done nothing. I assume they have a lot of interaction in hand for that to be the case. So, going to fire off the Mind Spike first. Only Fateful Absence is the only non-creature. So I wonder what else they've got in hand. Okay. Interesting. So maybe they've got expensive creatures, or maybe they just wanted to hold up Fateful Absence going into our Crucius turn. Interesting. So we could go Mind Spike first to make sure the coast is clear, because they have drawn 2 cards, but I kind of like going Crucius first here. And if they've drawn a counterspell or removal spell in the last 2 cards, then that kind of sucks. But if they haven't, then we can use Crucius to make a treasure and then hold up mana for Bind to Secrecy, which seems pretty important. Okay, so they have Otawara. Well, I'll just go for Mind Spike now, because there's no way we can get mana for Bind to Secrecy, unfortunately. They did have Go for the Throat. Interesting. I guess they were trying to make most use of their mana by going for Otawara there then. Okay, another land is perfect. So now we can go Crucius and hold up the bind, which is great. Oh, okay, they have Urtai. So we can't really play around that, unfortunately. That does mean that we lose the Crucius. But we do get to draw a card. If we can find our 6th land naturally, then we can just hardcast the Bombardment next turn, which we do. Okay, perfect. So... yeah, unfortunately we don't have a great way to stop Urtai. Binder's Secrecy is the main way that we're trying to win counterspell wars. Let's see what else they've got. Rusko. Okay, that's a bit of a concern. So I think we do want to kill... I'm going to kill the Rusko now before they can start triggering the clock with other instants and sorceries. And I think I'm just going to slam the Bombardment here. Just got to hope that their last spell isn't a counterspell. Oh no, I don't have it. Okay, sweet. So now Bombardment's in play. Now they do have white cards, so there is a chance they're running like Void Rend or Soul Partition that can kill the or deal with the Bombardment. But if they don't, then I think we should be pretty good here. Okay, so they pass the turn back, so we get to trigger the Bombardment, which is nice. Gonna bind to Secrecy, getting a copy of Rusko here, and then we can still. And we get to Mind Spike, which is pretty nice. But yeah, we can still cast the Consider during the opponent's turn, even if we play Rusko. Depopulate it. So it looks like opponent's on more of a controlling list here. So I'm going to play the Rusko here, now that we know they don't have anything in hand. And then we can go Consider during the opponent's turn. And then we get Mind Spike again. And potentially, you know, if we can get Bind to Secrecy under this Arcane Bombardment, especially against a control deck, that'll be sick. Because then every single instant in our deck will turn into a counterspell. So I'm going to set a stop during the opponent's upkeep here, and I'm going to fire off Consider in response to them drawing, so that we can Mind Spike immediately. So that if they draw like a sorcery like Depopulate or something, we can just Mind Spike it straight away. Now I am a little bit concerned about my life total here. I mean, we are going to get triggers off Rusko, but I'm not sure if I'm going to go for the second Mind Spike here. Maybe that's bad, because it is just we're missing out on a potential draw here, but I'm pretty confident that with Consider we'll find another instant and sorcery. Yeah, to be honest, maybe like Mind Spike only costing us 1 damage. Okay, opponent just scoops it up. Yeah, we probably should have gone for both Mind Spikes there, thinking about it. Okay, interesting. So opponent is definitely on a control deck, but we can't really afford to board out all of our creature removal because of Rusko. I do want to bring in Mind Spike and some Plunders though, I think. Although we have 6 cards to cut here, which is a lot. I think I'm going to cut the Pyres because I feel like Shieldred could be a card they bring in against us, and we do need to have an answer for that. Maybe we don't need all 4 Mind Spikes. To be honest, I very rarely bring in like all 4. I very rarely bring in all 4 Plunders and the extra 2 Mind Spikes, so I feel like we can probably trim on a couple of those at least. Having said that, Mind Spike is very useful at clearing the way for Bombardment, especially against Invoke Despair decks, but the 2 life loss definitely adds up, like you saw last game, so there's a chance that the 2 Mind Spikes in the sideboard should be Duresses instead for the matchups where it's relevant. And then, you know, we probably don't need all 4 Plunders in addition to the Siphon Insight, so if there was something else that you wanted to run, then I could definitely see just running 2 Plunders, because you know, the theory behind 4 Plunder 2 Mind Spike in the sideboard is that there will be some control decks that don't run many, if any, creatures, but considering, you know, Rusko, Shieldred, Diviner of Fates are all popular cards in control-ish decks, I'm not sure there are any control decks that really don't run any creatures, so probably don't need 6 cards in the sideboard for the controlling matchups. So this hand's pretty sick. You know, we've got double Crucius Fable and Siphon Insight here, so gonna fire off the Siphon Insight, see what the opponent's got in the top 2. If they counter this, I'd be very happy, because then that clears the way for Crucius. Yeah, okay. So now we can go Crucius, discard the second Crucius, tutor up the Bombardment, and now we have our win condition already, which is obviously great. And then next time we can go Mind Spike into Fable as well, which is pretty nice. Okay, they play Celestus. They go for the Throat, the Crucius, sure. So still going to go Mind Spike here just to see what else they got going on. Interesting. So going to take the Undersimplify because, you know, 1 mana counter spell is pretty powerful. And don't really care about Fateful Absence. You know, they can kill the 2/2 with Fateful Absence if they want. We're perfectly happy with that. And then hopefully we can play Bombardment next turn. That would be pretty sick. Okay, there's Rusko. And they do have mana for Fateful Absence as well. So, okay, we draw a land off the top. So definitely going to cycle away a couple of these lands. We already have enough lands to be able to cast a Bombardment, which is the most important thing. And I'm going to skip to combat first just to see if they Fateful Absence. There's a chance they might just to stop us attacking. Okay, they don't. But we can just fire off the Bombardment here anyway. Just got to hope that last spell isn't a counter spell. Oh, okay, it is. So that kind of sucks. I still feel like it's worth just jamming it there, though, because if they hadn't drawn exactly a counter spell there, that should just start running away with the game, I think. So now things are going to be a bit more difficult, but I still think we're in an okay position overall. Them having Midnight Clock is kind of rough, but we do have a lot of ways to generate card advantage ourselves. You know, we've got Siphon Insight in the graveyard, we've got Bind to Secrecy that's going to get us an extra card as well, because we have 5 card types in the graveyard. Going to play the land here first, and then I'm going to Maestro's Charm now, just so that we can potentially attack with the 2/2, give us an extra treasure. Okay, they Fateful Absence in response, so they get an extra Rusko trigger. We could Bind Secrecy to protect the Reflection, but honestly, in this particular deck, Reflection isn't even that good. The only thing it can actually copy is the 2/2, so I don't really mind about the Reflection dying here, and I would rather save Bind Secrecy for, you know, a more impactful spell, like if they have like a Farewell or a Planeswalker or something like that. And even if they don't, we can still use it to copy Rusko, which seems really good. So if they don't do anything that powerful here, I think we're just going to use Bind to make a copy of Rusko from the graveyard. Okay. I mean, Painful Bond, now we are in like super grindy territory. I don't want them drawing 2 here. So even though I would love to make a copy of Rusko, I think I'm just going to counter that. I mean, having said that, they are kind of close to triggering the Midnight Clock anyway, but I still feel like I probably should have countered that. Because they don't have that many lands, so they can't manually activate Midnight Clock that much. Like, it's going to take them at least another turn cycle. Okay. So I'm going to attack here first. Now, the Obsessive Stitcher isn't bad because it can, you know, help us loot, help us find potentially another Bombardment, which is kind of what we're looking for. But I kind of prefer going for Siphon Insight first because if we can hit another Rusko or something like that, that would be really good. Okay. I mean, Undersimplify is not bad. They you know, they do have... they only have 6 mana even with the mana rocks, but I think Urtai is probably going to be more useful as the game goes on anyway. Now, we still have both of these Siphon Insights here, so even though they are going to trigger the Midnight Clock soonish, I don't think we're going to be that far behind on card advantage. I mean, since they were quite close to triggering the Midnight Clock, maybe we should have used our Siphon Insight to make a copy of Rusko, but it's basically bought us like a respite for these next couple turns. They haven't really done that much since we countered that Painful Bond, which, you know, is very important for us to be able to Siphon Insight without having to worry about anything on the opponent's side. Okay, Painful Bond's not bad. Now we can, you know, draw 2 here, and we have the mana available to do it as well. So I think I'm just going to fire off the Painful Bond here. Now that does potentially cause issues if the spells that we draw... Yeah, so we drew a Plunder, and that means that if we draw a Bombardment later in the game, that Plunder is going to lose us a life every time we cast it, but that's like a very specific scenario. I don't think that's going to... You know, I don't think that's likely to matter, really. Now, last time we could have saved the Triome to cycle, but I feel like we have a lot of ways to use our mana here with like Siphon Insight and potentially what we hit off the Plunder. Well, I imagine with a full grip of 7 cards, they're probably just going to discard 2 if we cast Plunder, but I want to have a lot of mana available to be able to cast multiple spells on a turn. And I also want to continuously hold up this Urtai here. You know, if they play another Rusko or something, I want to be able to counter it. So I'll lead by attacking on lead by attacking with the 2/2 here, get an extra treasure. Fire off the plunder. Again, since they have a full grip of cards, I imagine they're just going to discard 2 here, but it definitely levels the playing field a little bit in terms of card advantage, so... Okay, they pitch a land. Yeah, they pitch 2 lands, makes sense. And then we'll just pass it back. Again, you know, we could have played the Stitcher, but I really want to hold open Urtai and Siphon at basically all times here. Especially because they have Undersimplify as well. You know, I don't want to cast Stitcher and then try and counter something with Urtai and then have Undersimplify as well. And with a full hand, it's not unlikely that might happen. Okay, Mind Spike, that's fine. We don't have anything in our hand that can hit. Now, this Agent of Rafine is a bit of a concern, but... because it is going to start producing them card advantage. But if we can find a Bombardment, I think we should be good. So we'll Siphon Insight here. Okay, sick. We hit a Rusko. And we can defend it with Urtai as well, which is really big. So now I'm pretty happy that I've been constantly playing my lands every turn because, you know, if we go Rusko and they try and counter it and then we Urtai their counter, I think we have enough to also pay for the Undersimplify as well here. So going to play Rusko. I imagine they have a counterspell here because they haven't done too much since they've refueled, so they must have a lot of interaction in their hand. Okay, they absorb energy, so we'll definitely Urtai here, and we have enough to pay for Undersimplify if they have that as well. Yeah, counterspell. So it looks like we might get away with this. Okay, sick. So now we get our own clock, and now things... well, unless they have another counterspell here. But if this resolves, then... we're in a pretty sick position because, you know, opponent obviously has a lot of cards in hand, but we're pretty far ahead on board, and we have our own Midnight Clock going now as well, so... okay, so opponent triggers a Celestus, a loot a card... they have a Rusko of their own, so I think I'm going to kill it before they can start putting counters on the Midnight Clock. Because if we wait for the clock to come into play, then anything they play to try and stop this will get them more counters on their clock. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's okay. That was completely my bad. I didn't think about a second Rusko. Yeah, so I should have definitely waited. We basically just gave them... well, we basically just wasted that... the Maestro's Charm there. Because they might have wanted to cast that second Rusko anyway. Yeah, we definitely should have waited there. That was my bad. Okay, so let's see what we draw here. Okay, sick. Crucius is really nice here because now we can discard the Stitcher to tutor up the Bombardment. I think we want to apply pressure here. You know, opponent's already down to 12. They don't have great blocks here, to be honest. Okay, they consider... so they got that off... oh, they must have got that off the Plunder earlier. Okay, they block. I mean, I'm pretty happy about that. I guess they are kind of low on life total now, but that is going to slow down the speed at which their clocks tick up. I mean, I guess that's the same thing for me as well, but... opponent has 2 clocks, so... although they are going to trigger at a pretty similar time, unless they manually activate them, so... but yeah, either way, we've got the Bombardment now, which I'm pretty happy about, and we can pump a lot of mana into our clock this turn as well, so... okay, so opponent Painful Bonds... now again, I wouldn't be surprised if the opponent has a counter spell for the Bombardment, but thankfully we have the Midnight Clock, so as long as they don't have a way to kill that, we do have kind of an inevitable way to refuel here. So we'll see what else the opponent's going to do. I mean, they've still got the Agent of Rafine as an option to keep getting them cards. But with a full... Yeah, they've got 7 cards in hand. I assume they must have something better to do than that. Okay, opponent goes to combat. Okay, so they just pass back here. So we'll definitely activate the clock twice here. I don't think it's worth using the treasures for a 3rd activation. Not yet, anyway. Especially because, you know, it would be nice to have those treasures when the midnight clock flips so that we can cast more stuff. Okay, Consider's really nice here because we can hopefully play Bombardment and trigger it immediately. And Consider can hopefully find another instant for us to cast during the opponent's turn to trigger it again. So we're attacking with everything here. To be honest, we're threatening to put them down to 1 if they don't block, so we could just win this by beating down. Okay, they fire off the Agent of Rafine. Put them down to 4. So I assume they probably have a counterspell for this, considering they haven't done that much since they refueled. Okay, Absorb only does deal of damage to them, and I think I'm going to fire off Consider now, just because, you know, we have a lot of mana open still. Okay, don't hit anything, but we can use Crucius to fix our hand here. Okay, we hit Fable, that's pretty nice. And now we're pretty close to refueling as well, which is sick. You know, we go up to 9 here. And then, you know, we could potentially get the clock to hit 12 during our next turn as well. Okay, so opponent plays a land. Wow, they cycle Rafine's Tower. I mean, that has to be good for us, right? If they got nothing better to do than cycle. Wow, okay. I mean, seems like the opponent's just got very unlucky with their draws if they... Oh, wow, they just scoop it up. Sick, okay. Nice, we got there, though. Okay, so what do we think of the deck overall then? Well, I think out of all, I have tested a ton of different ideas with Arcane Bombardment over the past few days, and I definitely think that this build is the best that I've come up with so far. It feels very strong as just a generic kind of controlling mid-range deck when you don't have the Bombardment, and then Bombardment completely snowballs the game in the late game, and basically every instant or sorcery in the deck works really well with the Bombardment. So if you wanted to play Bombardment in Alchemy, this definitely feels like the way to go going forwards. Now, having said that, Anvil has been a slight issue if they have multiple Anvil starts, so you might want to look into running some artifact removal, you know, maybe some Abrades in the sideboard or something like that. Additionally, the Jund Reanimated deck can be a bit of a problem if you don't have ways to stop the Titan of Industry, so maybe more Dreams of Steel and Oil, maybe some Rotten Reunions as well, but overall I just feel like this has definitely been the strongest out of all the builds I've tried. I know Korga initially had Jund, so if you wanted to stick with Jund, I do think the Jarsil build is quite nice and feels pretty good overall. And if you wanted to keep going, you know, you could potentially swap Undercity Plunder with Assemble the Team, which I know, you know, is a really nice card in this build in general. So that could be a swap out that I could see being really good if you wanted to keep Assemble the Team as part of the core of the deck as well, you know, as a way to find the Bombardment. But in general, for my testing, I definitely feel like the Grixis build has been the best out of all the different ideas that I've tried so far. So anyway, if you've got any suggestions for how you can improve the deck, if you've been trying this sort of build yourself, definitely let me know how you've thought about it. Overall, if you like this sort of video in general, or you have a deck you'd like to submit, definitely let me know, and I'll make more of this sort of stuff in future. And anyway, I'll catch you all in the next video. Big up.